Baldur's Gate 3 is a game that I feel like I should easily be able to love, and yet I can't even really say that I like it. Perhaps it would make more sense then if I said that I hated it for some reason or another, but I can't even really say that I dislike it. It's a game that I've now put over 200 hours into, and at best, I think it's pretty okay. And that's a bit of a problem for me, because it means that in the years to come, one of my favorite gaming genres is going to produce a whole lot of titles that I find to be, at best, pretty okay. And I know that's going to happen because I've seen it happen plenty of times before, including to this genre in specific. This video is not a plot synopsis.
No.
It's not a plot synopsis pretending to be a review.
No.
And it's not a plot synopsis pretending to be an analysis, but it will nevertheless feature spoilers, if only because they'll be mentioned in an offhand and casual way so as to provide examples. I'm not really sure how much this community really cares, though, given that the literal only reason that you would ever spare Minthara is that you know she's a potential party member and/or slam pig. And with that, on to the main event.
Not easily rattled, I see. Good. Makes the next part that much more straightforward.
Despite the fact that I've by this point made 3 videos about Silent Hill 2, I'm not actually that interested in the broader Silent Hill franchise. So it was that when splashed onto the scene for its 15 minutes of fame, I didn't really pay it that much attention, but there was certainly one thing that caught my eye and gave me a bit of pause.
Oh, I see. This is just Dark Souls again. The F stands for From Software.
Why does that game have Souls combat exactly? It'd be like if the next Devil May Cry released as an RTS. You might question why exactly that particular choice was made. It isn't as if these translations and transitions are always unsuccessful, though. Yakuza changed up its formula and released a game with a turn-based RPG combat system, and that went over pretty well, but that is a franchise which is known for its idiosyncrasies. The chicken manager, the adult babies, Baka Mitai, the vocal performance is so bad that you really would have preferred if they just used AI instead.
You guys worry about the front line. I'll protect the back even if it costs me my life.
People will continue to argue about whether or not Souls combat really works for survival horror, or whether Silent Hill F was actually action horror, but for me the reason that it was chosen is pretty obvious. At any given moment, every genre has something of a hegemon. A game so big, so influential that everything even remotely similar to it gets caught in an undercurrent. At first, this process doesn't seem so bad. The hegemonic game is usually a great leap forward. Smaller, more limber studios start to pick up on those little nuances, and there's a brief window of truly unleashed creativity before the stagnation sets in. And it always sets in because what was once a revolutionary becomes an incumbent. If there is one thing that the mass market truly cannot get enough of, it's buying the same thing over and over and over again. You get that dopamine rush of spending money with none of the worry that you might not enjoy it because it's the same thing you already own. This is what squelches those periods of their creativity. Because when a niche goes mainstream, most mid-size and smaller studios, which are often just barely keeping their heads above water, cannot resist the allure and security of attracting a broader customer base. This isn't always greed, and in smaller studios, I would argue that it almost never is. When a single failure could mean that your employees go without income and then have to be let go, you want to keep the prospect of letting people go and shuttering your doors as distant as possible. Which of course means trying to appeal to as many people as possible, which of course means warping your products such that they neatly exist within the shadow of those colossi. And then the genre begins to incestuously degenerate. Instead of innovating on faults and mistakes, it enshrines them. Then, as designs become more ossified, they're more easily copied by people who are really only in the game to make a quick buck. Those mid-sized and smaller studios, trying their best, start to get smothered by shovelware competition. Competition that will never stand the test of time, but there's just so much of it. Those studios get faced with a few choices. They could bleed out slowly, they could get acquired by a larger studio with more resources at their disposal, or they could innovate. Sometimes this leads the studio to make a breakout hit and to become the next revolutionary. Most of the time, though, the market punishes those studios which dare to step out from the shadow of the incumbent. This is how we get overlooked gems. Games ahead of their time which are nevertheless commercial flops. Not to say there aren't other reasons that these titles struggle. Releasing on the same day as Half-Life 2 wasn't doing Bloodlines any favors, for example. So the reason that Silent Hill F has Souls combat, I think, is not because it meshes particularly well with its narratives or with its horror, but because we're in the late stages of Souls' iron-fisted reign over action games.
If I didn't know better, I'd think you had feelings for me.
All of that was indeed a prelude to establish that the same thing has happened to the RPG space and is happening to it yet again, with run-on effects that I am not personally at all thrilled about. I don't like the contours of the current Colossus' shadow, nor do I like knowing that the brief little RPG renaissance I was enjoying is on the cusp of being squelched out by the diktats of the New Order. I'm talking, of course, about Baldur's Gate 3. I haven't played Claire Obscure, which might perhaps change this trajectory given how prominently it featured in the year's most elaborate Mountain Dew advertisement.
Mountain Dew has, had a long kind of standing partnership with the game industry.
But I'm a bit skeptical because I think the paradigm is the same, and it's the same one that Mass Effect impressed upon the world nearly 2 decades ago. Presentation is everything. Revisiting Mass Effect after what feels like a decade and a half is a really bewildering experience. Today, what feels like an extremely old, clunky, and outdated title was at the time almost unlike anything else. It hadn't necessarily done anything that another game hadn't already tried, but it managed to synthesize so many disparate elements together into an experience that would go on to change the RPG genre forever. Which also, unfortunately, happened to send the kinds of RPGs that I most enjoyed into hibernation.
Reverse and hold at 38.5. This mission just got a lot more complicated.
The first RPG that I remember ever playing was Neverwinter Nights, and specifically it was Shadows of Undrentide, the one with Deacon the Kobold.
Deacon?
In those days, you could just Google Mediafire plus the name of any game, movie, or album that you wanted, and it was probably there. Failing that, you could find it on LimeWire. I didn't really come from a lot of money, and so this tactic served me well. It's how I got Neverwinter Nights, and it's also why Neverwinter Nights left such an impression on me. You see, the game's assets are very basic, very simple. There's almost no voice acting, character portraits are drawn, and you'll be doing a whole lot of reading. Detail is breathed into the world and the dialogue by wordsmithing alone. I guess maybe with some primitive, silly little animations and scripts playing out on the board. It's not unlike sliding minis across a grid map, and that just means that there's something homey and comfortable about it. Long before trash like Critical Role turned the tabletop pen and paper hobby into yet another dumping ground for bored scions of the bourgeois who were looking to flaunt their parents' wealth by buying a bunch of stupidly expensive, idol-worshipping merchandise, it was liberation for the poor from our lowly circumstance. We didn't get to take long, exotic holidays. We didn't get all the newest toys and gadgets the second they came out. We didn't even get the rule books, no. We found a copy of the rule set online, or we photocopied somebody else's book, or we made use of SRD-20, or we just made shit up as we went along.
I'm casting magic missile. Why are you casting magic missile? There's nothing to attack here. I'm attacking the darkness.
A bunch of poor kids with even poorer prospects could escape it all, sit around a table with some loose leaf and Little Caesars, and cook up stupid stories about kitschy characters. It was permission to imagine and to dream, even if it is true that those dreams quickly became nightmares whenever a furry would join the group and insist on trying to seduce wildlife while wild-shaped. Back in those days, though, you could just ostracize and demean the person until they learned basic human decency, or, failing that, basic human hygiene. Neverwinter Nights was the sort of game I could imagine myself one day making. I could see myself telling these little stories with simple models and basic scripting. The sort of thing that the world did see aplenty with the game's online components. Its custom campaigns and modules were made by people who wanted to tell their stories, but who didn't have the storied backgrounds to be accepted into the comfortably upper middle class echelons of any of the entertainment industries. Now yes, it's true. Most of the custom Neverwinter Nights modules and stories were complete dog shit and they were laughably childish, but god damn it, that was a culture. Want proof? Well, what do you think the Earthbound-inspired community is? The space that gave us things like Yumi Nikki, Off, Lisa, Hello Charlotte, and of course, Undertale has also produced quite possibly some of the worst people to ever exist.
What the hell is going on? What is all this about?
Anyways, as the technology evolved, RPGs necessarily did so alongside it. And obviously, Neverwinter Nights itself was an effort to make use of new technologies rather than to continue with the 2D sprite-based engines like Infinity Engine that prior RPGs had made use of. As games like Knights of the Old Republic or Neverwinter Nights 2 released, these were not titles that I could see myself one day making because I'd never have the means to put something like that together. A lot of effort was clearly being poured into trying to make these games more cinematic, and I wouldn't really say that it worked. There's a janky charm to the ambition and attempts of these early cinematic RPGs, but I'd say that they were carried almost entirely by the quality of their writing. Avalone's Knights of the Old Republic 2 and Zeetz's Mask of the Betrayer were these standout stories which expressed a clear love of their source material and, frankly, of storytelling on the whole. And you just can't say that about Mass Effect. It's insane to think that this game was so influential, so genre-warping, and so revolutionary. It's insane to think that those other RPGs, which were so good at transposing me to a whole other world, were all unceremoniously snuffed for this game.
You had us worried there, Shepard. How are you feeling?
I saw... I'm not sure what I saw. Death? Destruction? Nothing's really clear.
Today, Mass Effect looks clunky and awkward and stiff, but at the time it was one of the most cinematic games ever made. Seeing the lips actually sync with the dialogue, seeing the sheer quality of the canned expressions and the animations, seeing in-engine cutscenes that didn't look embarrassing, hearing every line being voiced. And even if I know that this is the Legendary Edition and the original looks a lot worse, just the sheer fidelity of the character models and environments was so far ahead of the competition. That alone, the presentation, is what carried this game, because everything else was really basic at best. Which isn't to say that it's all bad, and in some areas the simple structure works to its advantage. The game's world building is actually very enjoyable because while it does force some things down your throat, like that Turians and humans don't really get along, it mostly unfurls its setting with environmental design and idle chatter. The game's immediate introduction manages to be interesting without doing something incredibly bombastic and over the top and stupid, like, say, featuring an exploding spaceship thing. The characters aren't complicated, but they're well enough realized for what they are. They're immediately recognizable to any fan of classic fantasy B-movie schlock. Kaiden is the wizardy advisor. Garrus is the wayward knight trying to do the right thing but in need of guidance. Rex is your mercenary coon barbarian king who kinda sounds like John Goodman. Tali is your exotic mysterious foreigner with unusual customs and an accent. Liara is the princess in distress who turns out to be more capable than she seems, and Ashley is the character you forget about for most of the film until she gets killed off. What makes them memorable is their aesthetic design and great vocal performances. Mass Effect's story is on a high-speed rail. I forgot just how quickly this game rushes you through things and how at every individual arc, seemingly everything revolves around whatever particular thread you're on at the moment.
Saren!
Saren.
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 Saren is...
Come on. Udina's presenting the Quarians' evidence to the Council.
You wanted proof? There it is.
This evidence is irrefutable, Ambassador.
Deviating away from the main plot presents a pretty bare-bones side quest experience, which is replete with the baggage of older RPG design, and almost everything else in the game is even worse. The gunplay isn't very good, the RPG elements often feel tacked on and pointless, the sheer amount of worthless loot you'll be turning into mush feels excessive, the exploration mechanics feel like they could have been something much more interesting than they wound up being, and on the whole the story unfurls into a pretty straightforward save-the-day space opera. In the end, Mass Effect was a revolution in presentation, ambition, but was perhaps a little too ambitious for its own good, failing to produce a meaningfully interesting fusion of RPG mechanics and third-person cover shooter gameplay. And nothing would be wrong with that would be fine, if not for the fact that its success meant that suddenly, all RPGs needed to exist within its shadow. Good stories and good storytelling were no longer the focus of the genre. All you needed was flashy, showy presentation, the kind of thing that most studios could never actually afford. Dragon Age Origins was still in development when Mass Effect's standout success was registering, and so it was to some extent spared from being forced into the mold of its bigger sibling. But, BioWare's output after that game leaned more and more into cinematic, bombastic, Hollywood, action, and I don't think that there's an exception among the entire catalog, all the way up to Veilguard, which is probably going to wind up being BioWare's swan song. Oh, what a bad way to go out. Each and every one was warped around the silhouette of Mass Effect, and the departure of David Gaider after Inquisition all but ensured that whatever sparse, holdout uniqueness that franchise had, frankly that studio had, would be lost, ironically, in favor of chasing the dragon. But even for other studios, to make an RPG after Mass Effect meant to make a choose-your-own-adventure style Hollywood blockbuster with full voice acting and action combat. Who was really capable of doing that? Like Skyrim and Bethesda threw a ton of money into a marketing campaign to attract the gaming curious, and it had just enough of a budget to ensure that there was spectacle to cover up all of the Bethesda junk. The Witcher 2 actually had an insanely ambitious narrative structure, with the game having 2 completely different second acts based on a single decision. But it understood to pump character fidelity, and its tutorial section can be called nothing if not spectacular.
Daddy, you better get the best for me.
So what's an example of a game that was squelched by the Mass Effect effect? Well, it's one where the beginning is boring, dry, flat, and almost completely lacking in spectacle. It's one where the world building, the character writing, the player agency, and the sheer novelty have all made it timeless today, but they were overlooked at the time of release. It's one that sold worse than its predecessor and was then overshadowed by its competition, at least for a time. It's, of course, Fallout New Vegas, and I think it's one of the RPGs that has aged the best from this period. In 2015, a few things in the genre changed up. The Witcher 3 would go on to become its own hegemonic title, but less for RPGs and more for open-world slop. Fallout 4 was a really big deal, but the game was clearly designed in the mold of Mass Effect, right down to a voiced protagonist, the BioWare wheel, and a horribly railroaded plot. Then, of course, there was also Pillars of Eternity. Pillars was a return to that old style of RPG that focus on writing and prose and systems, but I've never quite liked the game. I like Adair, I like Zawa, I love Durance. And I especially love that they eschewed including romances. And I'll complain about that in a bit, don't you worry. But something about this game has just never clicked with me. Pillars and Divinity: Original Sin, which released a year prior, they felt more like murmurings, like the first thaw from Mass Effect's grip. 2016 brought us Tyranny, a game that I don't really like, but I'm supremely happy exists. And I'm happy because its opening presentation finally showed that you could use art direction and animation to create compelling presentation instead of just trying to shove more and more polygons onto the screen. Like, the fact that this whole sequence is a part of the character creation is really cool. I like this part of the game, and the glossary is also one of the best things to have ever happened to the RPG genre. Problem is, the rest of the game, not really big on. The gist of it is that you're playing as the bad guys, and it really plainly did not do a good job of this, considering where the story goes and how childishly it presents tyranny. Anyways, 2017, a full decade after Mass Effect, saw the release of Tides of Numenera, a game that I've never played, and I don't think that I ever will, alongside Divinity: Original Sin 2. And I think that this was the game that finally broke the grip of Mass Effect, and it ushered in the RPG renaissance. Probably also helped by the fact that Mass Effect was busy that year shitting itself.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
I liked Original Sin 2 just fine. It has plenty of problems and plenty of strengths, but the best was yet to come. 2018 saw Pillars of Eternity 2, which pivoted much more towards the Mass Effect mold, full voice acting, an attempt at a much more showy and bombastic presentation style, and the reintroduction of romances. It didn't sell very well. Editing Frankie B here. I forgot how nails on chalkboard the narration of this game is. Like, seriously, Who thought Ellie from The Last of Us would make a great narrator? It's so... Like, just listen. Just listen. It's so bad.
An aged dwarf shares this strange floating platform with you. His face is creased by so many wrinkles that his features lie buried amid shadow. You can see his smile coming before it blooms, reshaping...
2018 also saw the release of Pathfinder Kingmaker, which, while admittedly extremely buggy and in many ways unpolished, was the game that affirmed to me that the good times were back. It brought me back to Neverwinter Nights because it was simple assets used to tell a simple story. There was plenty to read, it had a moderate budget, and it had that sense of sliding miniatures around over the map because that's what you do to move around in the game. Kingmaker was so remarkably ambitious, tried so many new things, and felt like real innovation was finally being breathed back into the RPG genre. Now, I mean, sure, the endgame falls apart. You have to take blind fight on every character, and if you ever do play this game, just trust me, do that. The companions were mostly pretty flat and straightforward, and the story itself has some pretty serious pacing issues. But to see a new studio break into the field so assertively with so many good ideas, how couldn't you be excited? And then, oh my god, Disco Elysium, Wrath of the Righteous, incredible additions to the genre. Games which will be truly timeless, and which were proud to strike out their own course. You could say that Disco was influenced by Torment, and you could say that Wrath was influenced by Baldur's Gate, but you couldn't say that either was just living in the shadows of its influences. Seriously, this period was just creativity and ambition unleashed. The RPG renaissance at its height was so good, and I miss it, bros. Like I miss Terry. And just like Terry, it was taken before its time. Maybe in that way, I do actually hate Baldur's Gate 3 because it might have spelled the end of the RPG Renaissance. Dark Heresy might keep the moment alive, given that Rogue Trader's magnanimously loquacious prose was a real treat to read through, but Owlcat has signaled that they are moving towards full voice acting, and the next big title that they're working towards is basically just their own Mass Effect, and that has me worried, and I think it's all Baldur's Gate 3's fault. Maybe not directly, but because it was such a success, such a sensation, it has created that undercurrent, that magnetic pull that is tugging everything along with it.
Fucking magnets, how do they work? And I don't want to talk to a scientist. Y'all motherfuckers lying and getting me pissed.
When I first played Baldur's Gate 3, the month that it released, I was kind of all over the place with it. I hadn't followed the game's development at all, I hadn't looked at any of the early access, I didn't know anything at all about 5e, I just bought it because Larian made good games and I wanted something to play at the time. I despise this game's intro. I hate how bombastic and ridiculous and over the top it is, how it assaults you with a bunch of stuff that you have no context for if you're at all unfamiliar with the setting. You go from squid people and cross-dimensional plane hopping and flying through the hells while demons attack, to beating up goblins in a low-level campaign. All the same though, that first act, the one that got to cook forever in early access, is a 10 out of 10 experience your first time through. The sheer reactivity, both to player choice and to your race, class, and subclass, is ridiculous. You get a sense that there's so many different possible solutions to any given quest, to any given combat encounter, and it all just works. I made lots of comparisons at the time to Deus Ex, and I thought it would quickly become one of my favorite games. But the trouble is, from the end of the first act onwards, it is all downhill. And by the time that you return for a second time through, the illusion's broken and it doesn't get any better. Here's a fun little fact. Almost half of the people who have purchased Baldur's Gate 3 have not beaten the first act of the game. And this is a shockingly low number. Veilguard has better completion rates. This game has a huge crowd which is obsessed with it, but which doesn't play it. And that's because the strength of Baldur's Gate 3 is the same as Mass Effect. Style over substance, presentation is king, and everything else is unimportant. Take the characters.
Perhaps I can turn this to my advantage.
Now, take away their voice acting. Do you like any of them? I think Lae'zel and Jaheira hold up because Lae'zel has an actual arc, and Jaheira actually seems like a character with an existence outside of the game's immediate story. But everyone else is so flat, so predictable, so uninteresting? They all have the same voice. Not voice acting, but literary voice. Now, to prove this, answer for me, who says the line, "Sounds like a recipe for disaster"? But you know what? I'm learning to enjoy the taste of chaos. Count me in. So, Asterion often uses the language about taste and flavors, and he obviously enjoys chaos, and you can absolutely hear him saying that line. You can hear it in your head, right? But it's not him. Now, Will could say this, but he'd have a large pause after, "You know what?" and then he'd laugh before he says to count him in. But it's not him. Karlach would barrel right through this line, nagging you at first before she pivots on a sharp tone, and then rather boisterously agrees to it at the end. Shadowheart could also fit. She'd be dismissive at first, a little glib by the end, and her intonation would fluctuate on "enjoy the taste of chaos." Jaheira would say this, if with her thick accent. I frequently forget that Halsin exists, but I guess that he could say it too. But it's none of them. It's Volo, actually.
Ah, my good fellow.
You could at least tell it wasn't Lae'zel because she'd never say something like "count me in," at least not with those words. Minthara probably also wouldn't talk about chaos in quite that way, and Minsk of course talks in the third person. But also this is not a Volo line, even though you can easily hear him flourishing through it, it's Gale. And now, even though you might have imagined this line said with all of those other characters' voices, you can also imagine how Gale's somewhat nasally, sardonic intonation would fade into a warm undertone which bristles with wry excitement as he says it.
Or something to that effect.
This line works for almost every single character in the game, and this is the problem. The fundamentals of the writing are just not good, and they depend so much on the voice acting to do all of the work for them, same as it was in Mass Effect. Neil Newbon's performance as Asterion is perhaps one of the best I have ever heard, and it's near the very, very top of all voice acting in the video game medium, and it's such a shame that this performance had to be wasted on this generic of a character.
I'm finally free! Oh, it feels delicious.
Neil's tone of voice, his cadence, his rhetorical flourishes, they're perfect. They really are perfect. They're always a treat. And this is one of the least interesting characters I've ever come across in any RPG. I have seen this archetype so many times, and nothing interesting is done with it here.
And here I mistook you for someone with taste. A pity.
The same is true for Andrew Wincott as Raphael, a phenomenal realization of one of the most bog-standard, by-the-book, one-dimensional devils to exist.
Then down came the claw, and that, love, was that.
You could not write a devil more basic than this one if its blood was pumpkin spice, but because Wincott is so damn good, it almost doesn't matter. I just want to hear him chew the scenery for longer.
I'm glad you came. Not to my door, not yet, but to the final reckoning. One more thing before we begin, though.
The characters are extremely reliant on verbal tics. Asterion says darling all the time, Lae'zel has her gith speak, Jaheira says that she's old a whole lot, Minsk talks in the third person. These sorts of things can accentuate your characters, but they don't form the basis of a character, and some of them just feel out of place for the setting. Karlach talks like a fucking Redditor, and she gets what she deserves! The rest of Baldur's Gate 3 is much like the characters. If you pull away the phenomenal presentation, the fundamentals underneath are lacking. Take reactivity and player agency. It's as wide as an ocean and shallow as a puddle. I'll use this neat little program called Twine to show you what I mean. In Baldur's Gate 3, most quests have maybe 3 ways to resolve them. 1, you are the hero, everyone likes you, and you get a bunch of experience and items. 2, you're still the hero, but you say something kinda dickish, and so the quest just ends early and you miss out on experience and items for no actual benefit. And 3, you're the villain, so you miss out on experience, items, NPCs, future quest lines, 2 to 5 companions, depending on just how evil you are and whether you can pass a persuasion check. But in exchange, you get a companion that you can now get on the good guy run anyways. I guess there's also the murder hobo option, kill everyone, but yeah, that one's not really supported. And that's in the best case scenario, by the way. In most cases, you don't have 3 different ways to complete a quest. In the game's most infamous example, you have literally 1 option to progress, and if you don't choose it, you die. It's the point at which you realize that you are very, very much on rails. At the very end of the game, your choices are be the hero or be the villain. Or, if you're Dark Urge, be the stupidly evil villain. That's fewer ending choices than Human Revolution. The magic of Baldur's Gate 3, the trick, is that these very rigid rails are hidden away beneath a dense foliage of fluff. Each quest has a variety of ways to navigate the dialogue tree in order to arrive at the end. If you've interacted with certain characters or objects, you might have more to bring up. Your class, race, deity, background might all open up another avenue, and these might just effectively contain flavor text, or they might allow you to skip a step in the chain, or they might immediately take you to one of the conclusions of the quest, which includes failing it. The outcome of how you resolve a particular quest, whether you stop at a certain dialogue step and whether you say this or that, might create or trigger a flag condition, might factor into a later quest, or it might just become a bit of flavor text down the line. Some classes have the ability to ask Will early on about his Sending Stone Eye. Later in the game, when he's explaining everything about his pact, he'll make a comment about the fact that you asked about it. Your first time through, you mostly don't know what's on rails and what's fluff. You'll likely wind up with a distinctly unique experience and doubtless be impressed when earlier decisions and dialogue choices are brought back up significantly later in the game. And you'll probably tell your friends, or you'll upload footage, or you'll look for other people's stuff. You'll binge secrets and items that you missed, you'll look at weird dialogue lines, you'll look at weird and unique quest resolutions. And even if it doesn't lead you to replaying the game, engaging with that content makes it get shared more by the algorithm, and that's free advertising. Baldur's Gate 3 is a game practically designed to generate engagement, and it's a game where it really makes perfect sense that nearly half of its player base hasn't finished the first act and probably never will.
Why don't we change the headline? We can load up something a bit less damaging for your reputation.
It is this, I think, which will be its effect on the medium. Now your cinematic, fully voice-acted Hollywood-style choose-your-own-adventure blockbuster needs to have 50 times the amount of dialogue to encompass a massive amount of reactivity whose only real purpose is to flavor the world and to distract from how on rails the story is. It's really the same thing as Mass Effect, except it's much more expensive. At least it doesn't have to be an action game anymore, I guess. Oh, you also need to have full face and body animation rigs for your voice actors, and you need to put incredibly talented celebrity voice actors into incredibly flat, boring, uninteresting characters that fail in every way to take advantage of the sheer, incredible range of the actor.
Bow, you dog.
I seriously cannot believe how badly they wasted J.K. fucking Simmons. If you want Whiplash after you interact with this catatonic character, go watch Whiplash.
Why do you suppose I just hurled a chair at your head, Neiman? So you do know the difference! I will fuck you like a pig!
After Baldur's Gate 3 released, it took no time for the Baldur's Gate 3 effect to set right in. Remember how smaller developers, after this game released, pleaded with people, pleaded for them to not act like this somehow has set the standard for all RPGs in the future? Oh, those silly developers. Asking a consumer to consider what they're consuming has never worked out before, and it obviously didn't work out then. To many newly lifelong RPG fans, because Larian Studios is not named Bethesda or BioWare or CD Projekt Red, Baldur's Gate 3 was obviously made on a shoestring budget. The idea that this game cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, that hundreds of developers in multiple different offices worked on it, that 6 years of development is an outrageous amount of bandwidth to put into one project, All of this was, is, and will be completely lost on all of these newfound RPG fanatics. I mean, there's literally no reason to release a modern game if it isn't fully voice acted with at least 40 different endings. Bro, if Larian, who literally just had some earwax and a sewing needle, could make Baldur's Gate 3, well, so can you. Back in 2024, Owlcat Games announced that their future titles would all be fully voice acted. And although they insisted that it wouldn't affect the quality of their writing or limit their ideas, that's obviously not possible. Just stop and think about it for a little bit.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
This is Tim Kaine. Now, I'm not really sure why I've brought him up here, because it's not like he's worked on some of the most beloved and influential RPGs of the golden era of yesteryear or anything.
Today I want to talk about how sometimes I hate voiceover. So, money. VO means more money spent on the game. Now, this is especially true if you want everyone in the game to have VO. But the other problem VO causes that everybody in the game industry knows about, and a lot of people outside the game industry don't, is voiceover locks your dialogue down earlier in the process than non-VO.
Having to voice act everything means that late-stage rewrites, the QA feedback loop, and the freedom of knowing that you have the ability to wax poetic without needing to worry about how many extra hours writing all of that will require your vocal talent to sit in the recording booth, all of that is gone. You do not have that flexibility if everything has to be voiced. Not only that, but text which is meant to be read is fundamentally different from text which is meant to be read aloud, and I know that this sort of thing is anathema to say these days, but I actually like reading. Now, I don't like reading shitty, worthless erotic roleplay disguised as young adult literature, but I like to read the kinds of things that AI can't regurgitate. I like to read books that really make me think, and as a result, this is my smut of choice. Owlcat's announcement that they would be shifting to full voice acting came after an interview they gave earlier in that same year, in which the founder and CEO Oleg Shpilchevsky, I probably said that wrong, discussed budgets and funding tiers based on the general size tier of your game. Wrath of the Righteous and Rogue Trader fell into a sphere of a AA game in terms of budget, and, at least according to this summary of an interview that was given in Russian, he agrees that, quote, Baldur's Gate 3 is the new benchmark for the genre in terms of quality and execution of certain elements. So RPG developers will have to come up with their symmetrical answers to make their content presentation more cinematic. This applies to things like cutscenes or voice acting, which might be a huge challenge for most of the studios. Looking at Baldur's Gate 3, you understand. It is becoming a must-have feature, which doesn't guarantee you success, but if you don't meet that bar, your game is considered one that no longer fits into the right category. So it looks like we will have to do a full voiceover for our next games. End quote. This guy is the CEO of the RPG developer of the decade, if you ask me, and he's saying in no uncertain terms, unless I guess the translation is lacking, that this genre, that RPGs, are now being restrained by audience expectations. An audience which cannot be asked to finish the first act of the game, who hates reading, that only cares if you can dump untold millions of dollars into your game, is now dictating that all games have to be fully voice acted and have to try their hardest to look like a really bad movie.
You, my friend, are the most special person in the circus, in all of Baldur's Gate. Does anyone know why? Why? You're special, my friend. Because I have a message just for you!
I will fuck you like a pig.
Owlcat have proven themselves incredibly ambitious and capable developers, at least if you give them about a year, maybe just half a year after their slated release date for a game. I trust that Owlcat will be able to navigate these hurdles, both in The Expanse and in Dark Heresy, and that they'll be able to create cinematically interesting games with compelling enough, if constrained, writing on a rather limber budget. But most developers in the world are not Owlcat Studios. I don't think that they're up to the task, and I don't think that they should need to be. Fallout 1 and 2 would not have survived the Baldur's Gate 3 effect. Neither of the original Baldur's Gates would have either. Neverwinter Nights isn't cinematic enough. The models of Knights of the Old Republic and Bloodlines and Neverwinter Nights 2 in New Vegas are all way too ugly. Kingmaker, Wrath of the Righteous, and Rogue Trader all don't have enough voice acting, and Disco Elysium doesn't have dramatic cutscenes where a giant spaceship warps through dimensions and explodes within the first 5 minutes of the game, so it fucking sucks. There's literally no reason to play any of these games that I just brought up here today. They're all trash, and frankly, it's an embarrassment that they were ever released in so sorry a state. If you don't agree with me, you aren't a real RPG fan. Real RPG fans would never play a game as awful as Knights of the Old Republic. Are you kidding me? Look at that thing. They will, however, have already pre-ordered the Knights of the Old Republic remake. Wow, that's gonna be so good. And since none of the games that I mentioned could have released to fanfare and applause under the colossal shadow of Baldur's Gate 3, don't be surprised when many actual modern RPG projects go tits up and get abandoned. Don't be surprised when inventive labors of love telling incredibly thought-provoking and well-realized stories become commercial failures, because unlike Larian, these smaller studios will not have Wizards of the fucking Coast to bankroll them for hundreds of millions of dollars over half a decade.
Yeah.
The mind flare.
It's the beholder, it's not a mind flare. I have you there. Nice.
Yeah, see, I was testing you.
I went for the eye.
Don't be surprised when people complain that a sublime indie RPG experience is way too short if it only lasts 20 to 30 hours because, well, Baldur's Gate 3 was like 100 hours. You can't release an RPG in 2026 that's not 100 hours. What the hell? Don't be surprised when actually small, actually indie studios get yelled at by customers who are so fucking stupid, they think that a 5-person studio has a similarly sized workforce to Baldur's Gate 3, a game which had the same amount of people working on it as did StarTod, because all of that shit has already started. I've seen it all already, and we are only a few years into the Baldur's Gate 3 effect. It's only going to get worse before it gets better. Beyond all that, maybe while I've got the time, how about a quick review of Baldur's Gate 3? Like, of the game itself. I dislike its long shadow, but how do I feel about the game overall? I feel that it's incomplete. Like, not the cut content thing, but the pacing is so all over the place, and it just snaps between glacial movement, and then suddenly there's the introduction or abandonment of tons and tons and tons of characters and details. It feels really slapdash in an unintentional way, and I sense that what happened here is that extreme, deep, and significant cuts tore apart a much larger, potentially more interesting, and certainly more coherent story. I think they didn't actually intend to stop at level 12 and instead cut 2 entire acts from the game, then stitched the rest of it together as best as they could, with the most obvious and distasteful scene being the time you have the literal one choice. I think Larian's dedication to providing all of those flavor fluff interactions really strained their development timeline, and the last year or two of this game's development was a whole lot of sleeves up, all hands on deck, cutting room floor, just get it to ship. As fun as the first time through Act 1 is, I just feel that the game struggles afterwards and becomes mired in contrivance. Its systems start to decay because 5e is fairly shallow, and many of Larian's homebrew decisions don't help that. Strength elixirs, a single level of wizard getting you access to basically every single wizard spell thanks to scroll scribing, how the strongest item in the game is a bottle of water because it can effectively double all of your damage. By the end of the second act, the tedium really starts to set in. in. Fights start to drag and feel slow, so you get into a practice of dumping all your spellcasts in order to wipe out the enemies in a turn or two, and then you long rest because, well, in the Forgotten Realms, I guess camp supplies rain from the sky. One of the dumbest decisions, one of the dumbest changes that Larian made was that initiative is a 1d4 instead of a 1d20. It's mind-boggling. The mod to turn it back to 1d20 is just mandatory in my eyes. The 1d4 roll also makes it so that low dex, heavy armor characters are entirely inferior and outclassed in every single difficulty, which is another reason to just get the mod to change it back. Maybe I dislike the system here because gishes aren't really that doable, though I do have to apologize. They are, but they require you to use strength-altering elixirs or the gauntlets or the dex gloves, which means that actually every single caster in the game is a gish and it has nothing to do with your build. I just refuse to use those items. I think that they're stupid. I don't really think that they should be in the game. The build I ran with here is Shield Dwarf in order to get heavy armor access with just 1 feat, a single level of Sorcerer at the start for Constitution save proficiencies, then 8 levels of Bladesinger Wizard for an extra attack, then 3 more Sorcerer for the Meta Magic and the 3rd feat. Those feats being 2 ability score ups and Great Weapon Master. Overall, it's fine. The problem with making builds in this game is that everything is based off of the items that you use, so in order to make a unique build, you have to look up every possible item for every possible slot, figure out when you can actually get it in the game, figure out if you can do that on the good or evil alignment run that you're planning, and altogether it's just nowhere near as interesting and freeform as, say, Wrath of the Righteous. And it's no surprise that the charm of making builds in this game comes exclusively from cheesing and exploiting the game, rather than making something flavorful in system that doesn't quite cause everything to fall apart. I think the Illithid are extremely boring and they make completely uncompelling and uninteresting antagonists. They're best used as environmental forces of nature around which the story explores its setting, its inhabitants, and the relationships of everything in it. It's sort of like how Sovereign works in Mass Effect, or how the Darkspawn function in Dragon Age, more to drive the story forward than to be the story. Here, like, one of the writers just thinks that Mind Flayers are the coolest fucking thing ever, the most awesomest fantasy monster ever made, and wants them shoved in everywhere. Every single time I get to the end of the game, I become the squid, then I knife myself.
What do you think you're doing? Ah! 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 Because I'm beyond pissed that Larian went so far as to even deprive me of that much agency. I think that this story sucks. I think that the characters are mostly bad, and at their best, they're bland. And once you realize how flat and empty both Orin and Gortash are, repeat runs of Act 3 are boring checklist slogs where you zip around to get the magic items that you want and then finish the game as soon as possible. The vocal performances, the animations, and the sheer commitment to having so much fundamentally pointless dialogue in order to just have flavorful fluff, all of that is admirable, even if it's somewhat questionable in terms of getting a product delivered on time and on budget. The game is obviously more fun with your friends, but I mean, like, what game isn't? I certainly got my money's worth, but, you know, having finished this video, do I ever see myself going back to it? Probably not. Maybe if my friends want to play, but I think they're all bored of it too. The music is good, and I do really like the leitmotif, but it's good in the I enjoy it while I'm in the game sort of way, not in the cranking it when I'm not in game. What this game excels at, what it is an exemplar at, are things that I care about a lot when I'm watching an animated film. But this is not a Pixar production, and if I compare how this game carries and delivers its story as a cinematic experience, it's just as bad as the mid-2000s RPGs, where all the characters stop to stand around awkwardly in place, cycle through their canned emotes, never talk over each other, and the camera snaps back and forth spastically. It's very good at looking like a very pretty, very badly shot animated film. When I'm playing a game, what I care about are the systems and the narrative. And for the most part, Baldur's Gate 3 does not meaningfully engage me, either as a CRPG or as a story. I can't say that I hate it, but I can't say that I like it. It's just okay. Yet it heralds the end of an RPG renaissance and the onset of another decade of meek, mediocre games cowering in its shadow.
It's like I always told you. I was just like you, an adventurer who yearned for greatness. And in mortal terms, I achieved it. But why conceal it? You may as well see for yourself.
Dance upon the stars tonight. Smiles and pain will fade away. Words of mine will change. No. Become. It sounded like a cat being strangled. God damn it! No, I'm moments away from a grisly death. At the hands of this bloody song. I can't. Nothing fits, you know? It can't hurt. I have an extra loot, if you want. I'll start from the beginning. We'll take it slow. Dance upon the stars tonight. Smile and pain will fade away. Wait, that's it!